Good afternoon. People get taken advantage of all the time. You know, it doesn't mean that people deserve to be taken advantage of. Certainly, being taken advantage of, having someone do something that's untrustworthy or acting without integrity, these are things that no one deserves to have that happen to them. Someone behaving with a lack of values towards somebody else isn't something that is okay or deserving. However, being the victim doesn't put you in the driver's seat, and it doesn't put you in control of your life. So it's not to say that other people aren't at fault for things or aren't to blame for things that happen to you, but being the victim isn't going to give you the power that you need in order to have the best life you can and get the best results out of people that you can get. And so leadership is being able to get the most effective and best results out of people, to get jobs done, to accomplish missions, to solve problems, and to motivate other people, to do those things for you. So, we don't want to be victims, right? We want to put ourselves in the driver's seat, and that means that we have to set our expectations. If someone screws you over big time or does the wrong thing to you, you played a part in allowing that to happen. Again, this isn't from a blame standpoint, but from a control standpoint. It does me no good to sit here, it does you no good for me to sit here after you've been screwed over, taken advantage of, and go, oh, that's really too bad, and, this is terrible, and I'll give you a hug, and talk about how much of a victim you are, and so how you've just gotten this terrible lot because these people did these things to you, or this person did something to you. That doesn't really, normally it's not productive. I mean, of course, we're not talking about huge power differentials like, childhood abuse or something like that. We're not talking about that, but we're talking about an adult day-to-day interaction. So if you're, in a relationship or in business or have employees or have employers, whatever, and you're being taken advantage of or treated the wrong way by any of these people, you're in part allowing it to happen. So, and you're allowing it to happen because especially if you're not setting your boundaries and setting your standards when it does happen. So you have to set up the expectations. If you don't set up expectations and set up controls, and this is especially in business and in entrepreneurship and when working with clients, with working with employees or employers, if you don't set up controls and set expectations, then it's only you that you have to blame if your expectations aren't met. Now, of course, we have normal standards of behavior, normal expectations like not cheating, not lying, not committing fraud or doing the wrong thing. And these are normal expectations that we have as human beings. However, we want to take it, not only define those things, but take it to another level. So let's say I have a client that is working with me on the buy side and is also working with two other agents, not telling anybody that they're doing that, capitalizing on my resources. And this is in real estate, by the way, because I'm obviously buy and sell houses. So I have some client who is capitalizing my resources as well as that of one or two other agents, and then that client decides, let's say, to buy a house with another agent. Well, the question I have to ask, now, first of all, that client screwed me over by doing that. That client abused my resources, essentially stole from me by doing that, okay? And so a lot of animosity and a lot of anger can get built towards that client. But the question I have to ask myself is, did I set the expectation beforehand as to what I needed, what I wanted, what I was looking for? Was I clear with that? Was I clear with that client to say, I'm using my, in so many words, here's what the value I provide, here's what I'm doing for you, I have a fiduciary duty to you, and I have an expectation that we're going to work together and complete the transaction. And if there's any problems or concerns, or if you're going to go with somebody else, that you would let me know ahead of time. That I'm your exclusive agent, because I'm putting my labor and my effort and resources that I've paid for into you. So I'm your exclusive agent, unless you say otherwise, and there's an actual conversation about that. So I need to set those standards right, and set the standards right from the get-go. So if a client runs off and does another thing, although it should be common sense that you don't just capitalize everybody's resources and just go with whoever, just that you just take resources from people with no return. That should be a basic human value, but people sometimes don't have the basic values. So you have to set those standards and expectations. So if they then do something like that, then they've violated your expectation. And in my world, getting contracts signed, getting buyer services agreements signed, things like that's how that works in real estate. But it could work in your relationships too. If you tell your girl, hey, this is not negotiable. I don't put up with this kind of behavior, and then she starts exhibiting that behavior. Then you can say, hey, I've been very clear with you, and then there's consequences to that, whether it leads to a breakup or whether it just leads to just you taking a stance and having to handle that problem, whichever it may be. But you're not going to allow it, right? And you're clear about what your expectations are to your female from the beginning. If you're clear that you're not. If you're going to be monogamous with her, for example, that you don't put up with male orbiters. Male friends are fine, but not males that want to have sex with you. A male that wants to have sex with you is not exactly a friend. A male that isn't going to put your friendship and our relationship first, above and beyond all things, any potential attraction that they might have had or once had or whatever. A male that's not willing to do that isn't really a friend. It's just someone that's trying to fuck you. You know what I mean? Like if that's, let's say that's your standard and you're clear about that, because I recommend in your relationships as males you don't put up with the male orbiter thing. And then she continues to have male orbiters. Well, I should have vetted that out beforehand, but I would never commit to somebody who harbors male orbiters. Why? You're not committed to me, clearly, so why am I going to honor commitment to you? You know what I mean? And that's a standard you set. Now, if you allow male orbiters, and then she's going on dates, emotionally cheating, physically cheating, you didn't insulate yourself from getting screwed over. Do you see what I'm saying? You didn't set the expectation beforehand. Never mind the fact that those things are unethical and shouldn't happen to begin with, but you didn't set that expectation for yourself, let alone her. So, if someone's harboring male orbiters and not being respectful of your boundaries in a commitment, and then they go off and cheat, you're somewhat to blame for allowing that to happen. When you could have, recognized her keeping the male orbiters and harboring that stuff in the first place as a problem. Do you know what I'm saying? And then you could have stopped that, or not continued or not invested yourself in that relationship as much, knowing that this is a problem, right? And knowing that this would happen. So it's about setting expectations. Very clear, like an employer-employee situation. If you have an employee that's doing work for you and you don't set out what your expectation is for that work, you can't turn around and yell at the person because you're not happy with the results. The expectations weren't set in the first place, and that's the other point too. Not just the expectations in an employer-employee circumstance, tracking those expectations as well, and documenting and making sure that you have evidence of whether or not expectations were met or not. And as an employee, that would be your responsibility too, is to set expectations for your employer, what you expect out of them for your condition of your employment, And of course, making sure that you're meeting their expectations as well. And that's another part too, is in these business relationships especially, but even in personal relationships, you want to make sure you're meeting the other person's expectations, so that they're not upset with you because those expectations weren't met, expectations that you didn't know that they had. Maybe their expectations are unreasonable, but if their expectations are not reasonable or they're not understanding the circumstance or whatever, that could have been solved beforehand by having those conversations. So anyway, I'm giving lots of examples and throwing lots of things out there, just something for you to think about. But what it boils down to is setting the standards and then not letting people cross that line. And if you're a dominant male that's in control of his life, this is what you do. You don't allow certain subsets of behavior. If you're with your girl, you don't allow male orbiters if you're going to be in a commitment, for example. So then it's less, if she's and then you recognize if she's unable to understand what that means and unable to, modify that behavior, or she's not understanding and not actioning that behavior, and she's keeping guys around that clearly want to have sex with her, well, then you're setting your boundaries, and maybe you're not in a commitment with her, right? Maybe she doesn't go any further than a dating stage with you, and you're not going to waste your emotional time, resources, and stuff into that female, right? Or if you set standards, in the hiring process for an employer, and they're unwilling to meet those expectations or your standards, maybe you don't take that job then, right? And so I can keep going down examples, but if you never set expectations and you just assume that people are going to behave to your standard, don't be surprised when they screw you over. You have a responsibility. If you're going to be in control of your life, you're responsible for setting the expectation, setting those standards. Some things can be assumed, of course, like integrity, for example, but again, it's all about, explaining and setting the standard for that other person. You don't have to say to somebody, if you do this, I'm going to break up with you, or if you do this, I'm going to fire you. It's not so much that, or if you do that, if you're not willing to do this, I'll never work for you. It's not so much that, it's that, hey, this is what I expect. And then you don't like necessarily lay out all the consequences, but you just lay out what you expect. And then you get agreement or disagreement on that. And if there's pushback or disagreement, well, then you have to know, whether it's through actions or words, and you have to know that they're not going to meet your expectations. If they're not going to meet your expectations, then you have to act accordingly. Because if you do nothing, then it'll just continue until they eventually screw you over. But at that point, it won't really be their fault now, will it? I mean, it'll be their actions, and maybe their actions are lacking ethics, but it's still now the responsibility lies on you. If you keep taking, for example, if you're a female and you keep taking the same guy back that keeps not meeting your expectations and keeps violating your lines and your boundaries of behavior of what you find acceptable, then you have no one else to blame but yourself. Same with you guys. You keep taking that tired-ass old girlfriend back that keeps doing the same shit or finding new shit to do and keeps violating your boundaries. You got no one to blame but you. You know what I mean? You're creating that trauma for yourself, which will have consequences for you later on outside of, excuse me, outside of just, outside of just the pain of being in that kind of relationship. If you're an employer and you don't have control measures in place, you don't have expectations, you don't have tracking systems, and you don't have control measures, and then people aren't meeting your expectations, they're not fucking you over. You're fucking yourself over. You just fucked yourself. That's your problem, your fault. And similarly, if you're working for somebody and you're not clear on what's expected of you, and then that employer is upset with you, that's your fuck up too, right? So put yourself in the driver's seat of your own life and set expectations. Don't let people screw you over, and don't become a victim. And that happens by setting those boundaries, setting those standards, and sticking by them, and not being afraid to take the proper action when people don't abide by what is considered appropriate by your standards. Thanks again for tuning in. Talk to you later.